So, hello and welcome to Learning in Lockdown. So this is the second in our series. So today we've got OWASP Top 10 for Serverless with Adam Chidgey. So just before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, we're not expecting a fire drill. So if you do hear a fire alarm, your kids have probably found some matches and are currently burning your house down. Or your other half is burning your lunch, so you better go and check that out. Just in terms of the platform, as you've probably noticed, you're all muted with videos turned off. If we could keep it like that for obvious reasons, just in terms of background noise and things like that. Questions, if you can use the chat function, so just type your questions in. At the end, we'll be inviting people to ask those questions directly. So if we invite you, if you can unmute, share your video, and then ask your question directly to Adam, which would be great. We want to get as much as kind of interaction as possible. So like I say, welcome to Lockdown Learning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rob Gelder. I'm a Director of Fruition IT. For those of you who don't know Fruition IT, we're a specialist IT and change recruitment consultancy. And for those of you who do know us, you'll know that we're really active in the tech community. We attend, sponsor, and run various tech events. So during these unprecedented times, we really wanted to, I suppose, keep that going. We didn't want that to stop. We wanted to, I suppose, keep the learning going, keep the meeting going, and we decided to create this series of learning webinars, meetups to keep the tech community going and keep learning. So this is a series. So yesterday we had Agile in Lockdown, which if you missed, don't worry, it's on our YouTube channel now. And today we've got obviously OWASP Top 10 for Serverless with Adam Chidgey, who is a DevSecOps and Cloud Native Technologist at Fujitsu. So on that note, I will hand over to you, Adam.
Right, okay, thanks Rob. Thanks everyone for giving up some of your lunch break. Hopefully you don't feel too sleepy. I don't want you all to nod off on this. So yeah, thanks for coming along. A little about myself, I guess, first. So I've been, as Rob said, a software engineer quite a few years now, probably 15 plus. Been doing it a lot of my life. Things have gradually moved, as you're aware, into the cloud. We're doing like hybrid models and things like this at the moment. So yeah, the flavor of the month seems to be serverless. So what does that mean for security, really? So I'm quite keen to just explore that area, and I'm hoping that everybody that's here has some familiarity anyway with like AppSec, application security. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of take those ideas and apply them into the serverless space. It presents, certain opportunities to improve your security. There are some things which just change the existing stance that you've got. And there are some areas where it's probably going to slightly weaken your security. So I'm just going to quickly broadly touch upon a few of those. But yeah, I guess going back to a little bit about myself. So as Rob mentioned, I'm currently a cloud native engineer, I suppose, at Fujitsu. I'm working within quite a large team. We focus on things these days like Kubernetes. I'm currently in a hackathon piece of work around that and security and securing the cluster. I've also worked previously in enterprises like large and small government within MOD. I've also, worked within smaller, rapid growth startups as well. So quite ferocious kind of to get features out the door. So looking at CI and CD and building out those pipelines that we're all, like, as application developers, like quite familiar with. So what I'm keen to do is get some of these learnings and kind of where the tools work, where they're a good fit for CI, bake them into the process. So you've probably heard terms like shifting left. You probably know what that means. It's taking typically the security audit part at the end of a deployment. It's a bit late by that point. It's in your environment. So in the cloud, it's publicly accessible, which means it's publicly vulnerable potentially. So it's a bit late in the day to be testing those things, unless of course you have no public facing side to it all. So you probably want to do as much of this sort of security testing as often as possible, and that's where good tooling that plumbs into your CI/CD process is really going to help you out. But I don't want to dwell too much on tools, because tools come and go, vendors come and go. As you know, they get acquired over time and all the rest of it if they're very good. But I'd like you to think more about the secure by design sort of processes that are there. So what I've done is, for those of you who are familiar with Google Classrooms, I've put together basically a lot of great resources all around this topic of serverless security. So some of the best stuff that's out there at the moment. What I'm going to do is hopefully encourage a lot of you to come and join up, because if you're there, the conversation is going to last beyond today. It's going to last beyond the next 45 minutes of serverless security. I think that's quite valuable, getting everybody together, different learnings, different experience with different tools. Do they live up to their promises? So I'm kind of hoping you'll come on this journey as well. So anyway, let's do some screen sharing, and I'll share that Google Classroom link. If you can make a note of that, get yourself signed up in there. You'll need to be logged into Google, and then it's literally Google Classrooms, and you get given like a token code. But I'll just go over to screen share now, just to show you what's going on in that space. So just a little more of a mention. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you want to connect with me there as well, feel free to look me up. Based in Manchester, been doing lots of AppSec, as well as, well, having fun at Fujitsu, doing hackathons at present. So what I want to show you over here is the classroom. So if I step all the way out, I'll post this link into our room. But if you can, I just want to get this admin bit out of the way, because a lot of people ask for presentation slides and things like that. I think, instead of giving you a dry slide deck, I'd rather you kind of dig into your own resources, be able to get that sort of stuff out. So let's go to, I'll just paste this over into the Zoom window for us all, so we can all get access to that. I think we'll try. Okay, we'll come back to that, but basically it's classroom.google.com. When you come in here to sign up for a classroom, you can see up here on the right hand side, there is the ability to join a class. Yeah, so go to classroom.google.com, enter the class code, which is not that. I'll just share that classroom code with you at the moment. There it is, it's XL673J6. And if you enter that code when asked to join a classroom, that will give you access to all of the material that I'm going to work through today. It's quite a great resource. I've been looking at it for sort of remote presenting, remote learning. So you can get this on your, if you've got an Android phone, I think it might work on the iPhone as well. You can get access to all this sort of material. So being a sort of a live resource, I'm going to update this as I go, as I discover things in the serverless realm. Okay, bit about me. I've already included that. The getting started section that I've got in here, I'll just zoom in a bit because it's probably a bit small. There's one quite a big resolution screen. So, okay, I mentioned earlier that with serverless, we've basically traded up, or we've traded a few different problems around. So, yeah, we've got this unlimited capability almost, or so we're led to believe. Azure was taking a bit of a tank in recently, wasn't it, when we pushed that to its limits working from home. But yeah, the idea behind serverless is we can just spin up more instances of these short-lived processes as and when we need it. Now, that's kind of one of the benefits, actually, is that they spin up very rapidly and they tear down very rapidly. So typically attackers are trying to gain a foothold onto a system. It's all part of what is called the cyber kill chain. I think the credit goes to Lockheed Martin for that. So the idea being there's initial sort of reconnaissance, and that eventually moves through to like establishing a foothold after you've exploited a vulnerability, and then you will actually land and expand and try to pivot around and so on. Well, one of the benefits of serverless is that it's going to give you a very short-lived process. So if it is breached, it's breached only temporarily, and then if it's stateless, it gets torn down and it's gone. There might be techniques to kind of work around that attackers would employ, but generally speaking, that's one of the benefits that are there. Another benefit to serverless security is we've got this idea of shared service model, shared responsibility. So your cloud provider, be it AWS or Azure, they're going to manage a lot of the operating system patching for you. What's more than that, they're going to deal with the framework patching as well. So if you're running Java and so on, they're going to be patching that stuff for you. So typically as part of recon, attackers will be constantly scanning their targets, looking for version drift. If you're not using the latest versions, straight away, as soon as there's something within, say, Metasploit or other, they'll be targeting your OSs and the services that are sat on top of them. So the good thing here, serverless gives us a reduced attack surface. Now that's kind of important. That's one of these key concepts in securing your software, is reducing your attack surface. That's a bit double-sided, because within serverless, it's very easy to deploy functionality, which may or may not be public facing. Now the problem with that is a proliferation of endpoints that are accessible by different events and so on. So if an attacker cannot go for your specific servers, they're going to start going for your application instead. They're going to be targeting those RESTful endpoints. They're going to be looking for dodgy authentication, maybe homegrown, home-rolled sort of stuff. So what you don't want to be doing is baking this stuff yourselves. What you want is probably, the main sort of, Active Directory, for example, in Azure, or Cognito within AWS, you'll be using these sort of services to then sort of protect and lock down your APIs. You'd probably also want to put things in front of your APIs so that you don't have a massive surface area of serverless functions. You may want to funnel traffic through API gateways and things like this. So it's worth considering this in mind. This is one of the sort of secure software design principles. So probably just broadly speaking, that's kind of like serverless sort of security. So I did mention earlier with when it came to denial of service, you almost have this unlimited potential like within the cloud. Well, that presents a unique sort of problem in the cloud, and that's something called denial of wallet, which was quite interesting. So this is the idea that if you were under like a DDoS attack and your services were being absolutely pummeled, you're paying for it, and you're only going to last so long before it gets a bit expensive. So yeah, in theory, you could keep your services up and on. In practice, though, it might drain your cash reserve, so you might go out of business. So we need to kind of look at things differently, set budget allowances, IP whitelisting, all this kind of stuff that was going on anyway. Trust our callers, if it's a business to business sort of API function that's there, you need to just make sure that you're throttling and you're doing things like sensibly. Otherwise you're going to get a bit caught out there. So anyway, let's try not to dwell too much on those things. What I want to do is just like introduce.
Sorry, just to insert, could you just zoom in a little bit more on that page?
Sure, of course.
It'd be good to just get a bit more of a zoom on that.
How's that looking for people, and are people in the group? So let's see how many have joined up. Oh, fantastic. So yeah, we've got a good number of people joining in, so they can have a nosy and a browse around the material that's in there. And there's a lot of great stuff I've put together in here. So that was basically just a broad look at sort of like serverless security that we've got in there. But OWASP, they've done like some of the, I would say the early on sort of material like in this space. They've done a great project, collaborative effort to to pull all this together, basically, the things that I've just spoken about are just general application security. Now we're applying that into the cloud, because attackers now, they can't go for your servers. That, you know, they're going to find it hard to go for like your network, because it's all sort of like tucked over there in the cloud now. So they're going to go for the application itself. And so what we're going to see is basically attacks such as injection, broken access controls and security misconfiguration, data exposure, bad deserialization. You know, these are all sort of topics within the OWASP top 10. But I want to introduce just a few of these other security reports that are out there, which are also fantastic resources. PureSec, the Cloud Security Alliance, and Sneak as well. They've done some fantastic stuff, a company called Sneak, and I've included resources to what they've been doing as well. I just like OWASP because they're giving it away for free. They don't really want much for it, so I think that's great, because like this is affecting everybody that's here at the minute. So just a quick intro on those. Sorry, I'm doing a quick poll to know who's using what sort of serverless frameworks and things like that, and what cloud provider. I think that would be quite useful, because that'll help me sort of steer where I talk and present things in this classroom here. So yeah, just a quick drill down, the top 10, because that's really the topic title here. But what I want to do is introduce you to, okay, don't just stick with OWASP, because there's a lot of good work that's happened by other vendors. So I was just trying to introduce those as well, because I think between all of them, it's quite a good sort of corpus of info. So yeah, like if you've ever looked at OWASP top 10 for AppSec, you've seen a lot of this before already, like injection attacks. We've been talking about SQL injection like forever and a day, haven't we? It's just basically people getting crafty with how they kind of break out and escape. Sort of like when you run commands like eval, or you know, basically you're trusting whatever's sent to you, and you shouldn't trust anything, because you're crossing a trust boundary. You're going from the public internet, which could be, who knows, North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, you know, all those APT threats that we hear about. You know, they're just going to probe around, and they're going to see how to crash your app. Yeah, they're going to be trying to get some sort of log data come back to them. Like they want it to crash. They want a stack trace. That reveals a lot about the framework you're using, about the libraries you're using, how far it got before it blew up. Yeah, it allows people to pinpoint and target specifics. Once they get that and they get version numbers, you know, they're a step closer to understanding what vulnerabilities were present in the version of the third-party code that you've baked into your serverless functions. So this is AppSec. It hasn't gone away. It's still, you know, you're still vulnerable to these kind of issues which are there. So I've got a few links in here towards their top 10, the OWASP top 10 for serverless. It's their interpretation, they call it. And also, yeah, the GitHub source as well. Like if you ever want to feed back into these projects, be it open source, be it OWASP, you know, great group to join in with. So that's a little bit about that. Now we could just drill into the OWASP interpretation here. And I'm just going to I'm going to take some of what's in here within this report. You've all got access to this. You can go through it at your leisure, and you can test your own apps against this. And you can start thinking about, okay, how do I protect my authentication, for example, into my app? Yeah, and we've got different ways of doing that now. We can use hardware tokens. Now, I'm quite a big fan of using hardware token security. I think we should all be using that. And there's a section over on the, actually, if I try and shrink this down a bit, sorry about this, faffing about. Yeah, I've put a section in here around like access control. So identity and access, here we are. So you may have heard this term or not, but identity is the new perimeter, because if everybody can access your services because it's publicly available, well, you need to do better than just a password and a username. You know, those there's so many problems with that, like keyloggers. Once they compromise an administrator machine, it will just sit there and it will just sniff up all of that. So you at home, if you're an administrator of your production services, you are the target. Your laptop is the target. Yeah, that's a different attack vector, probably one you may or may not have considered. You're all at home at the moment. You're sat behind probably a crappy firewall, right? A pretty crappy router. It can be exploited, yeah, if you're using your home devices. So endpoint security, really important. Perimeter security into each and every serverless function needs to have its own sort of perimeter checks in place. So a lot of that is around identity and access control getting in there. So you need good authentication measures in place. So I talk roughly about some of that here. Password databases, you know, I want to teach you to suck eggs, but you know, you need to be using that these days. Strong passwords, you know, you can't use the same one everywhere. Credential stuffing, you may have heard of this, bit of a problem out there in the world. This is when you hear like hundreds of millions of accounts have been stolen. You know, all the password hashes have gone through what's called rainbow tables, but basically it's all been cracked. And then they'll go around and they'll try against all these different services online, maybe your APIs as well, trying sort of passwords that was stolen. Eventually you get some lucky hits and you get to Amazon accounts and all the rest of it. So don't fall foul of that, and just think about it. Like, you could protect your APIs and your serverless as and when the time comes with those kind of means and measures. Other things to consider, cause and, well, anyway, I'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm just doing a bit of a pointer to secure by design principles here. So if you bake that into your development processes and have like workshops where you talk about these kind of vulnerabilities that might be there in your serverless functions, Stride workshops, I believe it's a Microsoft thing that's out there. But yeah, just kind of think it's not a tool, it's a process. Security. So anyway, I've probably banged on enough about that. Let's drill into this OWASP top 10, and I'll just give you a flavor of what's in there, but I'm hoping it becomes quite apparent. Protego Labs, I think I've said that right, but these guys were initial sponsors of this report, and there was a whole load of individual contributors as well. So some of which might even be on this call. So thanks for chipping in. Yeah, so, okay, let's jump into, we spoke a little bit about injection earlier. This could be almost like your guidelines that you could apply and test your existing software against. In this example here for injection, actually, if I take a step back and I just say something about injection, and it's typically used in combination with some of these other attack vectors. Now, usually you see multiple use of these kind of things. For example, like injection may have been caused through broken authentication, for example. Like in serverless, it's event driven. So it's not just HTTPS or HTTP requests coming in. Heaven forbid you're not using HTTP. Anyway, if it's on your own networks, it's your problem. But if for example, there was an S3 bucket. It goes into this example within the report. And that bucket allows people to publicly drop files within it. Maybe like you've got a little app on your mobile phone, and what it does is it like posts maybe like a JSON structure somewhere. And you've got a piece of serverless that just watches and hoovers up all those JSON files, processes them, and then deletes them. Now, that would be an angle for an attacker. Like, what they could do is, oh, okay, I'll exploit that. What I'll do is I'll use my credentials on this app that I just downloaded for free, log in, and then what I'll do is I'll inject a bit of bad data over onto that bucket. And that bucket would then be the host of basically the injection attack temporarily. So you'd have a serverless function, it would dip in, it would grab that, it would then run it, it would execute it, and then it would be kind of exploited. To an attacker, it's kind of a bit difficult because they're not getting the feedback that they want. So this is all part of the reconnaissance, yeah? There's going to be a lot of noise as people are probing around, testing your perimeter. And there's a part within the OWASP top 10 that covers that even. It's having very good logging and monitoring. We see that down there, that's like number 10. But if you're collecting the logs, well, you need to be alerted. You need to, I mentioned earlier about throttling. So if somebody's trying to do a denial of service attack, you need to know you're under attack. Like you need to somehow react, respond to that. Maybe start introducing like some sort of IP blacklisting, or however you're going to like sync that traffic. Otherwise you'll get the denial of a wallet I mentioned earlier. So a lot of these things come hand in hand. Like you need to have incident response. You can only do that with effective logging that hasn't been tampered with in some shape or form. So it's all about upping the bar of your AppSec. You know, a lot of you know this already. Yeah, you've been doing like DevOps for a while. You've got your dashboards. You've been looking at that. You've been reacting to any things long before your customers know of it, and that's fantastic. It's just an extension of that into security space, really. So yeah, let's have a quick glance over like some of these. This particular thing, this is a bit of JavaScript, and it's exploiting basically a deserialization problem. I believe that's there. It's kicking off a child process, and as part of that child process, this is what you would call command injection into the OS. So if you think of it like you got a bit of serverless code running, and really it's kind of allowed to kind of spin up processes and things using its own identity, its own sort of context. Well, what these attacks are doing, like from a high up sort of view, is they are breaking out of creating a child process. I mentioned earlier, like an S3 bucket. Well, you might have a bit of JSON in there, and what it does is it creates maybe, I don't know, an avatar image, right? You could have an app on your mobile phone. You say, generate me an avatar. It posts a bit of JSON somewhere. Then there is a serverless function. It picks that up, that bit of JSON from a bucket, inspects it. It then uses like image magic or something like this to then like create a bitmap image. It then drops it into a storage bucket, and then your mobile phone app then reads from that other storage bucket with some unique ID, and that becomes your avatar, perhaps. Yeah, that's kind of, you can imagine that sort of process flow. Well, if I were to not send a friendly bit of JSON, so again, it's trust boundaries. You've got your mobile phone, you've got a device that the client has full control over, not to be trusted. Okay, so they can play around. It's, in effect, I like to think of this as seams and Trojans, like security. It's all about seams. So where is the seam? It's between the client side, then there's this network and all the infrastructure in between, and then it lands over there eventually in a storage bucket. And then there's another seam, which is your ability to then pick that up into a serverless function. So that's the seam. The Trojan is the payload. It's what the attacker is doing. It's what they're baking into that JSON. So they're kind of exploiting here the way in which we sort of escape and deserialize data and then evaluate and just run it, you know, because we trust it. So yeah, trust nothing. Be a bit of an X-Files geek. Trust no one, right? So that's what Mulder would have said. So yeah, so in this example here, it's basically breaking out, creating a child process, scraping up some source code for the serverless function, and then posting it over to a domain owned by the attacker. So if you have very good logs in effect, you could see sort of inbound, outbound requests and stuff like that. You could be on this, like you could whitelist, for example, what that would be allowed to talk to. If you were using like proxies, for example, if you had like an outbound proxy, you could kind of protect like what things could be spoken to. You could use like mutual authentication. Like you could insist on like transport sort of security. Yeah, there's a few things here. I'll let you guys read that at your leisure anyway. A second version here, just having a quick look at this. So, okay, right, again, command injection, this goes through. So I did mention earlier, like we typically use these in combination with each other, these sort of attacks. There are great resources out there. I've included in the class, there are Sneak has provided one, and Protego as well. They donated a pretty damn vulnerable serverless app. So there's all the code base there. So what you can do is you can spin up one of these in your own development environment. bear in mind, don't put this into your production stuff, but just play around with it like in your sandpit. But yeah, there are a couple of good guides over there at the moment in the classroom. I'll just quickly flip back to that. So here's one, sorry, the Damn Vulnerable Serverless app. So if you're an AWS fan, that will give you access to, or basically you can spin one of those up and you can play around and you can test these exploits. What's more is within here, I've created it as an assignment, right? So you can you can have some fun with this. But if I go to the instructions for it, there's actually some lessons over here. I've included a link there. And what that will do is it will walk you through how to run all these different exploits and to kind of play around and get hands-on lab sort of experience with this. So you may find that very useful, the lessons that are there, and of course the GitHub project where the code is. So it's got all the sort of install instructions that you can run through there for that. So I just thought that was a fantastic resource for AWS folk. We've also got something, sorry, lost my way there. We've also got something over here from Sneak, and that's the serverless goof, serverless application security stuff. So that's an Azure version of the previous. And what that is yeah, these guys over at Sneak, they've given away this report, which I'll provide a link to here as well. So if you go off register there, you can download like this free report, and I've got to say it's fantastic. You know, like, it just covers everything off. It's brilliant. So I know I'm straying away from OWASP, but I just want you guys to have the best resources that are out there. And the OWASP one is, you know, it kicked off a lot of interest in this area, and it really did a fantastic job. But I think it's aging a bit. It's 2017, but no, well, a lot of respect to it. A lot of that stuff is still applicable. It absolutely is. It's just it's all about secure design for software. So anyway, you can grab yourself a copy of that, but stepping back, this serverless goof thing is in Microsoft Azure, and if you download and kind of spin up a copy of that, you can then sort of play around with the vulnerabilities that are there as well. So yeah, feel free, post your notes and all the rest of it, how you get on in that space. Back to serverless top 10 though. I just thought I'd branch out and just show you some of those resources that are out there. Broken authentication, I touched on sort of earlier. Like basically you could have a lot of sort of protected APIs that are out there, a lot of sort of endpoints that are doing the right thing. And then you may have something internally within your company. For example, I mentioned, well, within this example here within OWASP, what they do is they have a serverless function that's like monitoring a drive. Yeah, probably again another bucket, right? So just looking for any oh no, actually it's a code commit. So yeah, it's tying in with like CI. But if you have authenticated apps, authenticated serverless functions challenging the untrusted sort of user, but then you expose something which it doesn't involve any authentication at all, it's entirely possible for to somebody to bypass the logic. Like if you think function A equals function B equals function C, yeah, it's all event driven. This function does something, it's an input, it does something, there's an output. And so it's a chain of functions that trigger off this kind of behavior within your system. So what if like you had something somewhere near the end and it, you know, you don't usually call it as an API, right? You know, the end user doesn't actually know about it. Well, if an attacker knew about it, like if you're trying to do the whole security through obscurity, like if you had an insider, right? Even somebody within your own organization who knew that something that was there, could they just sort of trick that thing to bypass all the safeguards and all the checks and all like your authentication? That's what I was saying earlier, is like you need to treat every serverless function as it's got its own perimeter. Yeah, each and every one of them is the front line. So treat it as such. So broken authentication kind of talks into, you know, make use of what the cloud providers offer you, their frameworks that are there themselves. So as a good example, this risk meter is quite useful. It's kind of For those who don't know, OWASP, what they tend to do is look at the most common vulnerabilities that are out there that keep on happening, and then they kind of assess them in terms of their potential, like blast radius, like damage impact it's going to have on your system. So they kind of give it this kind of rating. It's quite useful. It just tells you how to triage and where to focus first in your effort. Sensitive data exposure. So again, just make sure, you know, we've heard about like storage buckets, you know, and they've got like confidential information in them. Like there are loads of tools out there now where you could just literally, I just sit there brute forcing like storage account names, like looking for anything that's publicly open and available. Do a crypt, you know, this is basically, it'll end up being indexed in Google, you know, if you don't take care of it. So broken configuration, we'll come into that later. So yeah, again, XML, external entities, this is again, it's another injection sort of attack. Within a piece of XML, you can bake in an external reference. And what it will do is, as it parses the XML, it will then go off to that external reference, bring it in, and then execute it. So you could hijack the whole XML parsing experience the same way you could hijack the whole JSON deserialization experience. So it's kind of, again, this is like a way in. This is a way to do some sort of injection of a command or SQL or something like that. So yeah, that's just broadly talking about that. Here they talk about how they've done that exactly. Yeah, there you see it in there. It's using a file. So yeah, it's basically baking in a bit of Python. So they're doing some Python parsing in here, and then they've just pulled that in. So access controls, talked about that already. Yeah, everything has its own perimeter. So be careful, like the privilege of, the idea of least privilege as well. This is really important. So because of blast radius, yeah, I know it's very convenient to put all your serverless functions all into one big security box, right? You put them all into the same permission box and you say, right, they all have admin access, right? They can all do whatever they want because that's easy to develop, right? It's nice and convenient, right? But the thing is, security is lowering your usability. In this case, it's lowering it for the developer. Like the developer kind of, they just want to get stuff out there, right? Get it working. So it's kind of not great because like if that function were compromised, it has access to lots of privileged stuff that it never needed, but now it's escalated and now it's doing some command injection and it's kind of hijacking a system, and then before you know it, you're owned and you lost your database. So lock it down, yeah? Treat every serverless function, think about, okay, does it just need read access? Does it have to write? Okay, where is it storing? Yeah, in here it's like S3, for example. Azure, not so great in this area. So for you AWS folks, just do an assessment of your functions before you put them out there. Do you even need to put the function out as well as another thing? So yeah, again, that's kind of, if something is breached, if a serverless function is breached, you're limiting its damage potential, and that's really important. Security misconfiguration, yeah, we just spoke about that. Probably, maybe like a private bucket that's publicly accessible. Okay, that's a bit of a cock up, isn't it? You can do a lot here as well. Like they're going into like broken authentication mechanisms. Again, don't roll your own. Use what's already out there. Cross-site scripting. This is great. This is just a way to sort of hijack clicks, and there's so much evil caused by this thing, So yeah, go back to things like the cores that I mentioned earlier and access control. There's two different types of cross-site scripting. So you're going to have like things that persist, and you're going to have like reflection attacks, which just bounce back on the user. So all of these sort of terms, what I'm going to do is introduce you to another OWASP resource, which are the cheat sheets that they've done. And what you can do is use this OWASP guide together with the cheat sheets to break down and get actual practical hands-on sort of know-how on how to address these different issues. Because if you use any of the scanning tools that I'm going to talk about soon, they will introduce to you a whole bunch of vulnerabilities and issues that you probably never heard of before. And you need to kind of, within your team, sit down, look at, okay, what does that mean exactly, this vulnerability? Okay, how do we go about resolving that? What's more important than another? Because trust me, if you get 1,500 vulnerabilities reported, yeah, a whole bunch of those would be critical. Okay, so now we've got 50 criticals. What one first? So again, it's a bit of a training thing going on here. So again, in the classroom, there's a great resource in there for the cheat sheets for OWASP. I really recommend looking at those to work through this. Recently did this with a colleague at work. He put together a website. We redirected it. Here's a nod to you, Jason. Yeah, we redirected his website to the Cliff Richard fan website. So that was a location, window.location redirect. So anyway, that's enough of that. Insecure deserialization, again, that's kind of evals and running stuff within third-party libraries. So yeah, I don't want to dwell too much into that, but in effect, that's what was going on with the XML earlier, the external entities. So, okay, let's just flick over that. You see some obfuscated code there, pretty clever. All right. Components with known vulnerabilities. Again, like if you're using NPM, you're pulling in the stuff that's publicly available, that's got known vulnerabilities. People might just have a go, like they might not even do the recon. They might just, you know, it's a well-known vulnerability. Let's just try everything. Let's just give it a go and see what happens. See if there's any sort of, you know, timeout of an API. Like sometimes they'll do command injection with a sleep. And they're like, oh, okay, it's fairly benign. It doesn't do any damage. But what it does is it says, okay, that API usually takes, you know, sub-second to return. But I've put a sleep for 3 seconds in. And now I've just run my command injection. It hasn't done anything dangerous to the box. But what it has is given the attacker some recon info that, okay, you're vulnerable to command injection. So it's a very sort of benign way to test these things. So yeah, again, keep your stuff patched and up to date. I know it sounds boring, but you can have other mitigating factors as well, like you know, having proxy gateways and things like that into your serverless estate. Insufficient logging and monitoring. So lastly, yeah, like if somebody's having a go at you, yeah, they're going to be leaving a lot of noise in your logs, right? You know the pattern of behavior when it comes to your serverless apps. You know what talks to what, you know what's out of the norm. So just sit there, like machine learning is great for this sort of stuff. Yeah, it can just sit and digest like what's normal behavior when it's in training mode. And then like you can switch it off and then enforce that and say, right, that box should never talk to that box. Yeah, it should never happen. Again, surface area, reduce the number of services running, have discrete roles, compartmentalization, sort of segmentation of users of like where things run, that sort of stuff. So much so like in serverless, if you've got something which is, you know, not particularly critical, yeah, why run it in the same account? Like you could put it in a different account, for example. So if it is breached and it kind of goes a bit wild, then it's not in the same sort of account. So things like that, or different regions. Bear that in mind. Again, great stuff. They've all said it. They talk a little bit here about denial of wallet, denial of service. You know, in theory, it's limitless. Yeah. Secrets management, it's fantastic as well. If you're not already doing it, protect your secrets. You know, don't bake stuff into your code. I don't think I hope a lot of people don't do that anymore. But yeah, just make sure you're protecting your secrets using like Azure Vault, for example. It allows you to lock down what apps have access to what. Yeah. And shared spaces, business flow, logic manipulation. I talked about that a little bit earlier, like service A equals B equals C and so on. So you can kind of manipulate things later on in the process flow. And when I talk about like events between services calling each other, it doesn't necessarily have to be HTTP at all. Like you could be pulling a message from a queue, or as I mentioned earlier, a storage bucket, or it could be anything. Yeah, your serverless might be triggered from a Twitter feed, yeah, a certain keyword in there. It could be anything, it could be an email, yeah. So they're the vectors, they're the way in, yeah. And traditional sort of scanning tools are not going to identify all those routes into your code base. So you've got to think clearly about what you've got already, and just understand, okay, what are the inputs? Okay, how am I processing it? Don't trust anything, okay? And then some output that comes out, and then sort of like the handoff between functions. For example, in stateless apps, we have a lot of dependency on like caches. You know, you might have like Redis, and because they're stateless, they're great. Yeah, we've got all these containers spinning up, or, you know, and they're short-lived, they come and go. So what we have now is a lot of chatter like on a network. So what we've done is we've now exposed what would have been a secret that typically, traditionally, would have been just located in one process on one box. Now that is available to a distributed compute sort of capability. So now they can all get to it. So if you think of terms of like surface area, now you've got you know, dozens of functions that can all access the same Redis server. So any one of those things could be compromised and then get access potentially into like Redis. They could start crafting up and pulling things out that another serverless function put in there. So again, you need to think about like the principle of least privilege, like what should I have access to from this function into that cache and things like that. So again, you know, we've got loads of great stuff going on, you know, with immutable sort of infrastructures and so on, but you know, we are storing state. It needs to be protected. We're centralizing it. So, you know, sniffing traffic on the wire, even, you know, SSL. Are you talking to the right Redis box? You know, has somebody done the old switcheroony and put something else in there, which is just soaking up all your traffic? If they popped a proxy in between and they're just sniffing traffic on the wire as it comes and goes, you know, some sort of tap. So think about that. It was just like, when you start picking apart your design, you start realizing it's to do with seams and Trojans. Seams, again, a stateless container talking to a stateful one. So that's a seam, and the, you know, and the Trojan is the sneaky bit to get in. Anyway, I probably waffled enough about that. Snyk do some fantastic cheat sheet. Well, they've got a cheat sheet here. I'll follow that whole resource through. That'll take you to their serverless security report, which is great. Get yourself that as well. The OWASP cheat sheet series. If you've got any sort of terms that you don't quite understand, dig in there. Like, seriously, have a look around. They've also got like a great sort of AppSec learning area as well. Input validation, there you go. The root of all evil, not doing that at all properly in a lot of cases. So yeah, understand the mitigating factors, regexes, yeah. There's a lot of good stuff in there for sure. So I just want to talk just really quickly about security tools. Basically, they're going to come and go over the years, right? These companies will fold. I think Twistlock was acquired by Palo Alto not so long ago. They're making this big kahuna of like a one-stop shop of cloud-native sort of security, which is great if you're a big enterprise. Probably comes with a price tag to it. There's open source tooling as well within this space. Aqua, pretty good. They're giving away stuff for containers as well. So I'm currently evaluating Aqua. So I'll flick onto those tabs in a minute, but I've just put together probably just a rough idea, a bit of inspiration that I had from reading online. But you know, what makes good DevSecOps tooling? And that's what we're talking about here, aren't we? We're talking about, you know, modern day application pipelines, deploying something into production. How do we test it's not vulnerable before we put it out there? How do we test our cloud infrastructure isn't vulnerable before we put our application into it? So you should have, like Aqua do a tool called CloudSploit. You know, there are others out there. You want to make sure that you're deploying your app into a secure environment first. So the right buckets are exposed, you know, the right permissions are in place. Once you've got all that in place, then start thinking about, okay, so how do I get some security tooling into my pipeline? And so it needs to be easily automated and so on. So think about that. Protego, these guys, fantastic, yeah. They've got a lot going on. Just go off, explore this stuff, yeah, your own sort of leisure. Trust me, they're all good offerings. That some have got their drawbacks. I know Aqua's not working with Azure Functions. The Enforcer is what they call it. I'll show you that in a sec. Twistlock as well. So bumper section there, just about identity and access. You might want to go through that because again, it's about how we talk to our APIs, how they talk to each other. Might be quite useful stuff. I'm going to put some more sections in here as well around like secrets management that I touched upon. So you can use HashiCorp Vault for things like that, or Azure Vault I mentioned, and secure by design. So I'll flesh that out at some point. But if you kind of have these ideas in the back of your head around like least privilege, I've talked about secure by default. You know, if you spin up, you know, like a Postgres database, don't just spin it up with like the default password in there. You know, make sure it's kind of, you know, in Terraform, you kind of inject that stuff in, make it dynamic. So, you know, you're not exploitable the moment you put something online. Robust error checking, you know, exceptions or exceptional behavior. Don't leak stuff out to like you know, don't bubble it on back. Yeah, there's only one person that needs to see a stack trace, and that's the developer, right? It means nothing to an end user. You should never ever show them. So think about that. Trust no input. We banged on about that. Open design. It's basically closed designs, you know, unaudited. Who the hell knows what they're doing, right? There could be all kinds of backdoors. So it's one of those principles. Failing securely, so don't just bomb out and let everyone in. It goes without saying, really. Unless you think of like fire alarms, yeah? Like you protect a big old building and then like you put all these sprinklers and fire alarms in, and then somebody can start a fire and then open up all those secure doors so everyone can get out. Something to think about. Anyway, reuse of existing security controls, so don't bake your own, use those available frameworks. The reason being is people will be actively developing them, and often they will have open designs, so they'll be open to a lot of scrutiny as well. And data protection, really important. Data on the wire, I mentioned earlier about stateless things, functions running in containers, serverless. Talking to like a Redis cache, for example. So you've got to protect it on the wire. You've got to protect it in transit. You've got to make sure that other things can't get to the bits that you are working with. You could completely isolate it and just have, you know, look at it in terms of risk. Look at it in terms of like trust. You know, highly trusted things should have a lot of doors you've got to go through to get there. So, and logging. So again, that comes back to OWASP. Like all these secure principles are baked into OWASP, everything AppSec. So hopefully that's kind of, that's quite a good sort of roundup on things. I can quickly delve into Aqua. So I'm just currently going through an evaluation of that with some of the team at the minute. So these guys basically, we've got a license to just evaluate container scanning security. They have something called function runtime policies. So I'll evaluate this at some point, put my findings out there, but they have this idea of like a nano enforcer, and this kind of, it allows it to control the permissions that a particular serverless like Lambda would have. So again, that's kind of reducing the blast radius of things, and just making sure everything is kind of only doing what it's supposed to do. So I've yet to kind of explore this a little bit better. But here's kind of basically you integrate it with your compute provider. I'll have a look at what it can do for Azure as well. But then you'll end up with like a dashboard and a whole bunch of risks and all the rest of it. So it will feed into this dashboard. Don't grill me for it. It's just a toy. But if you've not seen Aqua, you get this kind of thing into your pipelines as well. And you can start exploring like how containers, and when I get some more updates on the serverless side, I'll share them with you. But that's all cool stuff. Aqua Twistlock, similar feature set. Go off, explore some of this other stuff as well. That's my advice. So I think I'm kind of okay to hand it back to you, Rob, because I've waffled on for quite some time. I'm conscious we're almost at 2 o'clock already. Hopefully I didn't bore too many people.
No, that was great, Adam. Get some really, really good positive feedback coming through straight away. I suppose it'd be good to open it up and for people to ask any questions based on what Adam said just there. So I'll leave it a couple of minutes to see if any questions come through.
Okay.
I think, Adam, just in the meantime, a couple of people struggled to use the login. I don't know if that I think obviously we've got quite a few people into the classroom. So obviously works that log. Somebody mentioned about not being able to get in through G Suite. I don't know if that was, if you know anything about that or.
Right, no. Like if anyone's having issues, just because earlier a colleague of mine, he had a very old sort of Google mail address, and he had problems getting in here. So yeah, it's something I need to explore, to be honest. You know, like I can grab this stuff off. I'm just using like a personal Gmail thing that's here at the moment. Not sure like if some you can try with a different Gmail account, perhaps that would help. Yeah, so some of the teething problems. Yeah, I'm just trying something a bit different, I suppose. So this conversation goes on beyond this this Zoom meeting. Sorry.
So we have just had a question actually from Alexis. So if you want to unmute and share your video, you can come in and ask that question if you like.
So thank you very much for your time. I was curious to understand how you envisage the Google Classroom material evolving.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, I've put a quiz in there. It's Serverless Security Quiz 1. And what I'm hoping is, based upon the audience that's here, if they tick a few boxes, like literally things like your cloud provider, if you have one, are you currently using serverless and things like this, then hopefully that will steer this sort of like the narrative of what's in this classroom. Because there's no point me talking about a particular tool which is not compatible with a certain cloud provider. So maybe it's a poll by numbers. I think it would be quite useful. So yeah, and like really, like however people want to go with this, actually, like to me, it's, you know, it's here to stay, serverless, I think, because what we've done is we've pushed off a load of security concerns to the cloud providers that are out there. I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon, actually. So it's only going to grow. So we're just going to have to do this more often. I'm really keen to have people understanding of the principles that make software secure, because I think the tooling will come and go and you'll pay great sums of money for it as well. But the important bit is when I'm sat there and I'm in my ID and I'm cranking out code, yeah, stop and think. I'm just about to use eval and a bit of JavaScript. Whoa, okay, what am I doing? Is there another way? I'm kind of hoping that lasts and that persists, because once you understand like deserialization, sort of vectors and things, and you just naturally start coming up with different ways of doing it, and maybe that will seed better code reviews and things like this within companies out there. Does that help?
That's very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Adam. We've got another question coming from Ian McClure as well.
Okay.
Hello.
Ian, you got the stage, mate.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's about tooling, really.
Yeah.
I know there's a few different tools for doing kind of localized pen testing and what have you, but specifically on serverless, I don't know if you'd found any particular tools that would help us evaluate whether we're applying good practice, whether we're suffering from any of the OWASP top 10.
Are you in the cloud at the moment?
Yeah. We work at DAZN, so we use AWS predominantly.
Okay, all right. Well, start off with some sort of, you know, groundwork. Just make sure that the infrastructure is good. You know, like in terms of like just checking like your buckets and things like this, and all the authentication side of things in and out of your APIs. There are some, like I'm evaluating Aqua at the moment. So if I find, you know, how that does, I'll share my findings on that later. But yeah, there's a few there. It tends to be, you know, sign up, get a trial demo license. You've got it for a month, because that's what we've got with this Aqua at the moment. I'm deploying this into Kubernetes at the minute, and just doing it that way. So it spins up a few containers. It sets up like a root container as well, so it can go in and inspect. But what that's if you're playing with containers. But for serverless, I guess Yeah, like what you want is something in the IDE, like a linter, you know, that sort of thing, because it's before you even push. So, you know, I'll be keen to explore tools that are bringing it right down to the IDE, extensions within Visual Studio Code, if you use that, you know, just because with all these tools, once you learn them, I found this with TDD as well over the years, is that once you understand it, you can take the tool away, which is like a crutch. It's like stabilizers, isn't it? It keeps you kind of on the road, and then you carry on without it, and you kind of, you've already learned from it. It's a bit like I used to use like ReSharper years ago because I'm a bit of a C sharper guy, and yeah, once I kind of understood the refactorings that he was doing, I just naturally did them anyway. And I think like pushing left is all about that. It's about changing our coding behaviors. Yeah, a lot less code world, a bit more production sort of thing.
Yeah, because I mean, we've got a fairly good, you know, set of spreadsheets and checklists and stuff for particular AWS hardening, because we're using AWS predominantly.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't really use, you know, tooling or automation, or like you say, bring it right down to the IDE to mitigate it and like you say, move it left. So I'm just wondering if there was many that you'd come across as, you know, this is a handy thing to plug into your development pipeline or whatever.
Yeah, I'm all for getting it into the IDE, and then when that check and measure fails, getting something into the CI pipeline. That's where tools like Aqua and Twistlock fit in. They've got like these extensions within like Azure DevOps, for example. It allows you to like add it from the marketplace and then scan your containers. That's what's going on here, or your deployment of serverless. So it could be as simple as like a grep, like in a bash script. Yeah, you're looking for certain keywords. I mentioned eval earlier. Every time there's eval, for example, it's like, well, big red flag. Like when you're doing some sort of deserialization. But it's more than that. It's inspecting the dependencies that your code. Like, let's face it, nobody builds anything from scratch anymore. Yeah, we're plumbers. Yeah, we're pulling in all these different libraries and we're using the bits we want, but we're exposing ourselves to entire libraries of things that we don't actually need. Yeah, so you know, could that be sort of exploited? Those other bits of the library that aren't needed. But anyway, food for thought. But if I find a linter, a good one, I'll evaluate. I'll drop it in there. But yeah, you could. No, really not for baking your own. But if you know any, drop it in the classroom. We'll explore those together. Because that'd be handy stuff. Better than a spreadsheet. I guess. Yeah. All right.
Cheers.
Thanks.
I'm not sure if there's any more questions coming through, but I suppose we'll give it a minute, but I'll close things off, in terms of bringing it to a close. So obviously, Adam, a huge thank you for putting that together. Google Classroom is a great resource. Obviously, a lot of effort's gone into that. So there's some real good resources in there, and obviously, people can refer back to that. So obviously, thank you for doing that and putting that together. A couple of bits of me. So obviously, thank you everybody for attending. I mean, we put these on for free, and all we really ask is to get some feedback back. So I think a feedback survey will come out to you via. So if you could please send that back, that would be really useful. Finally, we've got a couple more sessions. So like I said before, this is a series. So next week on the Thursday, we've got basic fundamentals of accessibility testing, which is on Thursday. And then on the Friday, really interesting and relevant, we've got Fight COVID-19 together using super rad low code tooling and machine learning. So that sounds like a really interesting one as well. So I think there's a final question come in from Aaron, which we can probably cover.
Right, okay. Well, you could, Aaron's mentioned, like, where do you look for known security vulnerabilities in Node? Well, I'll probably start off with MITRE. Have you guys come across MITRE at all? So this is where CVEs come from. So if you notice, I'm using Brave and DuckDuckGo as a privacy concern of mine. Anyway, this is like one of the many feeds that will be put out there publicly. So these chaps, you probably come across. So let's do MITRE CVE. There you go. I'm looking at all the CV results for Kubernetes at the moment. So feeds of this information are used within scanning tools like Aqua and Twistlock and so on. So you want good feeds of information. You want to go as upstream as possible. They will use other sources as well. And it tends to all get a bit proprietary and a bit sort of, people sniffing around the dark web and all the rest of it to try and find out what's going on. But like if I just drill into one, for example, in Kubernetes, yeah, it's a great sort of resource here. You could also filter this and start looking for things for Node. That's probably a good place to start. Yeah, and this will tell you based upon the version that you've got where to find problems relating to Node itself. So an ID or a keyword. Yeah, let's just have a quick look for anything Node. And again, it's going to be specific to certain versions. So SQL injection vulnerability, okay, that's probably not filtering what we want exactly. There you go. There's one for Nodejs. Command injection, so we talked loosely about that earlier. So here you go, utils find opencv.js in node opencv. Not sure what that is exactly. But typically when you do the scanning tools, they'll offer like great support and assistance. They'll steer you towards, yeah, basically like how to remediate and how to like mitigate certain issues. And sometimes it's worth bearing in mind, you may actually have a dependency on a component which is now unsupported. All the developers have left the project, have gone on to newer things, and you've got this vulnerability there sat in your code base and you can't fix it because there is no patch, there is no update. You're stuck with it. So all you're going to have to do is refactor that thing out if you want to fix the AppSec, or mitigate it by putting like proxies, like reverse proxies and things like this in the way of the function itself to kind of mitigate. But again, those secure software design principles of like blast radius, the least amount of privileges it needs to run. Yeah, you could go further than that. You could actually just make sure that the function calls on the OS are doing what they're supposed to. I hope that helps. I hope that's kind of a pointer into MITRE. They do some fantastic work, those guys. Yeah, go dig it out. Anyone there? It's gone very quiet.
I think that's it for questions.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, like I said, once again, thank you, Adam. It's been really great. So I asked for feedback through that survey, but through the chat, we've already had some really positive feedback coming through, particularly around that Google Classroom and all the material that's in there. So I appreciate that, and yeah, this can carry on through that really. So is there anything else you want to add, Adam?
No, just like if you can get into the chat, and I'm reading through there. Some people couldn't get into the classroom, so I'm going to try and kind of figure out what's going on there a little bit and make sense of it. But yeah, sorry about that, but I can always, I can save these things as PDFs if anybody like really wants it. They're just not going to have that sort of interactive experience. My only suggestion is like have a look at your Google account. There's something not quite right there.
Brilliant. Also, a question came through. So you can watch this back if there's any points that you want to revisit. So it'll go onto our YouTube channel. So yeah, please. You need to.
Great. All right, guys. Well, enjoy your lockdown. Sorry, no, I should say that. It's not very funny, is it?
Well, we'll stay safe.
A good time to study, I would say. Yeah, good time to study. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks, Rob.
Enjoy your weekend.
Yeah. See you on LinkedIn if anybody uses it.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.